So in this segment, we're going to be discussing the US election, kind of an in-depth look, I would say, on the election of Donald Trump. Donald did the double on the DNC, and he's won it again. So I think it's worth having a look and kind of discussing, as far as they care about a British guy's interpretation of what's going on in their country. But who cares? At this point, you guys voted for a lunatic. Or some of you guys, and I think it's worth doing an autopsy on why, and also talking about stuff the left in the UK can learn, stuff the Labour Party need to watch out for, especially. So I saw this clip from AOC just kind of talking about the DNC. I don't know how kind of recent this clip is, but I think it does kind of it's a good message for people who think the DNC is a left party.
Democratic Party is not a left party. The Democratic Party is a center or center conservative party. We do not advocate for, we can't even get a floor vote on Medicare for all. Not even a floor vote that gets voted down. We can't even get a vote on it. So this is not a left party. There are left members inside the Democratic Party that are working to try to make that shift happen.
But they don't have the numbers, and the problem is, like, the only way to really shift the party is to get into the primaries and change the candidates. Effectively, just like AOC did with Joe Crowley, you need a lot more of that. And it's difficult, it's very difficult to do that, especially the way the party machine is set up.
But you're right, it does convey a certain sentiment about true believers. And there are a lot of true believers that we can capitalism our way out of poverty in the Democratic Party. If anything, that's probably the majority.
Right. I don't think they even believe that, to be honest. I think they don't really care about poverty that much, to be honest with you. So I thought it was interesting from AOC. You got this guy in Dunderhead saying, he blames the voters for this. And then in 2019, he blamed Corbyn supporters. So, okay, Mr. Dunderhead. And I saw this from Deborah Mattinson. She was one of the main kind of people at the, within the Labour Party, kind of advising Starmer on this. I don't know if she still advises Starmer now, but she talks about the advice she tried to give to the Democratic Party, and she's trying to argue they didn't listen.
I was out there working with a think tank called Progressive Policy Institute. Rather than working directly for the team, we did speak to some of their strategists and gave them advice. I'm not sure they listened.
So what advice were you giving the team that you feel, looking at the result, wasn't heeded? What were you saying they could do to overturn this narrative that it was a changed election?
I was trying to sort of translate across some of the learnings from our successful campaign here in the UK.
So let's bear in mind here that they got a very low voter percentage of only 36%, and won on that against one of the most disliked iterations of the Conservative Party. And trust me, no one really likes the Conservative Party much in this country. So they won 36% of the vote, and they won a majority. So, arguably Kamala did better because she won more of the popular vote. But I think the problem with Labour is they didn't realise how lucky they were to win this last election. And so for them to go over there and try and advise, I don't think really made sense.
What we did was to identify who were the voters that we really had to win in order to win. We called them hero voters. Actually, there was striking similarity with the voters that the Democrats needed to win. They were working class. They were less likely to be college graduates. Here in the UK, they were more likely to have voted Brexit, for example. And there were people who had been traditionally Labour voters who had moved away from Labour in 2019, when the red wall went crashing down.
So you're talking one-off voters who left to go to the Conservative Party, and they gave the Tories a chance, and the Tories fumbled it. And that's why people like her would not be able to kind of advise a party like the DNC, who were the incumbent party. They were the party that I think the voters lost faith in. That's the problem. So, like the stuff about targeting specific voters obviously makes sense. Any campaign will tell you to do that. The problem is that they never catered to them whilst they were in power, not enough. When we discuss things like inflation, you'll see that later on in the video. And this is the thing, like, you can talk about triangulation, all of these things, but when you're actually in government, you have to cater to these voters that you've worked hard to kind of win over, because if you don't, you'll lose them, because we're in a system where there's not much voter loyalty anymore. I think in the UK, definitely. In the US, it's becoming more of a thing as well. You're not really loyal to a party. You vote for who you think is probably the best candidate. It's becoming more of a thing, especially on the left. So I think that's the failure of the Labour Party's advisors. They didn't understand that they are not the challengers in this case. They were the champion, and they lost. They lost the belt. Jonathan Ashworth, the guy who lost his seat in Parliament in Leicester South, and then he was advising the Democratic Party. What he gave them advice on, God knows. I did find this interesting from David Sirota saying this was pre-election. Does anyone see the electoral danger of the Democratic Party spending a decade and literally billions of dollars on TV ads telling the country that Bush, Cheney are horrible, but then the same Democratic Party turning around and touting the endorsement of the Cheneys, the Cheneys who aren't that popular, and Democratic insiders begged the Harris team not to campaign with Liz Cheney or embrace her father. But the problem is they tried to argue like Donald Trump is so uniquely bad. He makes George W. Bush look good. He makes Dick Cheney look good. And everyone's like, no, these are awful human beings. The worst. And this from AOC again, because I think, you've got Pelosi talking about had the president got out sooner, there may have been other candidates in the race. So there was not a lot of faith in Kamala Harris. Pelosi saying, as I say, Kamala may have, I think she would have done well in that primary and been stronger going forward. I don't believe that for a second because she lost the primary. She did really badly. She did really, really badly. And this AOC kind of discussing it.
I'm going to say what a lot of these folks aren't saying. I'm just going to say it. If you think that there is consensus among the people who want Joe Biden to leave, that they will support Vice President Harris, you would be mistaken. And I'm going to say that because if they're going to come out and say all their little things on background off the record, but they're not going to be fully honest, I'm going to be honest for them. I'm in these rooms. I see what they say in conversations. A lot of them are not just interested in removing the president. They are interested in removing the whole ticket.
And that's the answer right there. They did not have any faith in her, and rightfully so. I don't think she was a very good candidate at all. That's one of the big problems they had. They had Joe Biden, he was gone. Like, the fact that he got as far as he did in terms of not resigning was crazy to me. They didn't want to shift the guy. In the end, they did. But they didn't want to do it because the optics of it would be really bad. And, it is his fault, but it's also partly not his fault because he's not all there. You could tell he was trying. When he was at, I think it was like a NATO summit where he said, I'm introducing President Putin. You're like, what? He made two major errors just in basic speech. And I think the more the kind of American public, especially the more the world stage saw he was not fit to be a politician anymore, that's when it all kind of crumbled for him, and he shouldn't have ran again. He should have been a one and done. It's crazy behavior to me, honestly, but it's not 100% his fault. This is Ryan Grimm kind of discussing where, Biden's big fumble is.
I think on the economy, his big mistake was, you remember when inflation started going up and we started to get some corporate earnings calls where they were saying this is an opportunity for us to raise prices and keep them high. They were saying it publicly.
He should have gone on the offensive.
And I was saying it constantly. Other people started saying it. And then the White House economists sent out a message publicly that said, we don't have the data for this. Didn't stop me from saying it, but I can't talk to the whole country. Yeah. If he had hit that, and that's the kind of left-wing populist. So his legacy is getting crushed by a pretty good economy because he couldn't actually go after the real villain. Doesn't that go to the point of what...
And one of the things is, you can have an economy with growth, but if people don't feel the growth, it doesn't matter. If wages go up by, 15%, but inflation's at 20%, all people are going to feel is that 5% hit, especially depending on what things go up in price. And I think for Americans, the economy is very important to them. They always moan about gas prices, mainly because they don't have good public transport, because they spent all their money blowing up Afghanistan and Iraq. Or Iraq, as they would say. But the issue here is Biden had a chance to kind of push through left-wing populism in his presidency, just like he did in his campaign. He didn't do it. And this is what I mean when you talk about failing voters. This is what it's about. And that's why, that Labour clip, it just doesn't make sense to me.
What you said, and let's wrap up with a really good point you made earlier about tacking to the top versus tacking to the left or right, it's not about left or right or even being a socialist or Bernie. It's about Democrats being able to identify villains, enemies, opponents in the way that Republicans do, from trans kids to, Iran to liberal elites on the coasts. They're very good at finding enemies. Democrats prefer to campaign with their enemies.
Yeah, that's true. Liz Cheney's a good example of that. And you've got this guy talking about how Ali Maraj, I don't really like him that much, but the argument that the UK couldn't fall into this kind of the Donald Trump kind of trap, the right-wing populist trap. He is right. It's already happened with Boris Johnson. It already happened with Brexit, and that's something we should watch out for. We have to be very careful of, because Nigel Farage still exists as a very strong political force, even down the line here. We've got a situation where Donald Trump's talking about putting tariffs of around 10 to 20% on all UK goods. European companies have lost share prices because of this. This is a major problem. This is what he's going to do. And if you think this is going to help you deal with inflation, it's not. It's going to push prices up even more. And for the UK, you're talking about a hit to GDP. You're talking about £22 billion hit to the UK exports. It's going to be crazy amounts. It's really going to damage, essentially one of America's historic allies, but it's also going to damage a lot of European countries that do export to America as well. And I think if he does go through with this again, it's going to make Europe a lot more insular as well. This was the polling when when Joe Biden, internal polling from Biden's team, and this would have been an annihilation, an absolute annihilation. Look at this, all red. 408 to 130. Maybe it is a miracle that Kamala won some of the things she did actually win, some of the states she actually win, because honestly, Biden left her with an absolute poison chalice. And this is kind of the news agents here. These are the two of the, or they're quite good sometimes. They're kind of discussing what happened to the young voters, and I think one of the things that that Trump really did very intelligently was going on the podcast circuit. I think that ingratiated him to a new generation of voters. He rebuilt his coalition.
The influx that was supposed to make a huge difference of 3 or 4 million. Where did that go? It's a really, really good question mark. And I have to say, the first bit of news, sort of, under the radar news that we should have understood and missed was when the exit polls for Georgia came out. They said that there had been an increase in independent voters for Trump. And I think we kind of didn't understand what that was telling us, because many people thought that independent voters basically means, first-time voters. A lot of the time, people who are not affiliated with one party or another. And we thought, the narrative was that the new voters would be predominantly going for Harris if they were women. And they predominantly did, to be fair. But when we saw that increase in independent voters in places like Georgia, which Trump then won quite authoritatively, we should have realised that actually Gen Z wasn't monolithic.
I think that any political...
to treat any kind of age group or any generation as monolithic is one of the stupidest things you could ever do, especially in politics. Generations vote differently, and also you get big splits within a generation of voters as well, because these age groups are so broad. I'm one of the youngest in the millennial gen. I'm probably the last of them. As my friend would say, the last of the millennials. So if you think about some of the millennials are in their 40s or near 40, the way they see the world and their kind of upbringing would be very different to how I was kind of raised and the things that kind of influenced me when I was growing up.
Campaign chief who says we're going to rely on the youth vote to get us over the line is going to get laughed at, because historically, and you think of so many elections where that has been said, young people are going to really turn out to vote this time, and they are going to make the difference, and that is what you need to watch out for. And we did that to some extent.
They did in the Scottish referendum.
Yeah.
Young people don't typically vote, especially compared to old people. There's a reason why politicians normally cater to, Gen X and the boomers. It's because they'll actually turn out and vote. Even Corbyn struggled to get out young voters, even with a policy platform that was very much catered towards them.
I mean, look, we talked about the 400,000 people who registered to vote after Taylor Swift, came out and said, back this. It then, But look, I mean... That's,
registering to vote is one thing, but actually winning someone's vote is another. Just because you're registered to vote doesn't guarantee you're going to vote for the DNC or the Green Party or whoever. It just means you put your name down to say that, maybe I will vote, or just to give yourself the allowance to vote. But you still have to win someone's vote. That's the most important thing. Politics basics is get out your base, get out the vote, effectively get people out to vote. That's the most basic rule in politics.
Part of the answer, and this is the thing that Democrats will find most chilling, is that, well, there were lots of Gen Zs who voted, and lots of them voted for Trump. So we can see from the exit polls that, for example, if we look at young women, in 2020, 33% voted for Trump. In 2024, 40% did. If we look at young men, in 2020, 41% voted for Trump. In 2024, 56% did.
I mean,
so,
that was the Joe Rogan strategy, essentially. You know, get people out because they're hearing you and they like you.
He's having a conversation with people like Rogan, where you can see him as a dude. You won't see, you know, Trump, the guy at the rally, or Trump, the guy in a debate. You won't see him being like, you know, trying to incite people, be fiery or argumentative. He's just having a conversation with someone, and that is probably one of the most humanizing things that you can have. You know, you able to have a conversation with someone, or just see someone within like a normal kind of conversation, and that in my opinion, that humanizes someone a lot.
And if they haven't voted for the first time, but you're talking straight to them, I mean, there was method in that.
So a lot of these podcasts and stuff, they're softball interviews. You know, these are people who were not very political or very good at asking tough questions. So, you know, Trump kind of humanized himself.
Trump actively targeted young men in particular, which clearly has paid off, at least to some extent. And the revulsion that was expected from young women did not materialize. And I wonder, and again, this is speculation, but I wonder whether there is an argument around that, which is that particularly for the younger part of that cohort, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, they've grown up with this guy. They know this guy. To them, he's actually the norm of what a president could be like. And it was quite interesting that actually Harris's support was actually stickiest among voters over 65, who perhaps have a much greater conception of what a traditional, normal president would be like. And I think the chilling thing for the future of democracy, frankly, is that a lot of young people are growing up in this country looking at Trump and thinking, this is what a normal president is. And that's...
They might not even realise how important the role of president is, to be fair. You know, Goodall's got a lot of drip here, and he also has probably the best takes out of the three, which is ironic because he's the youngest G. And you're talking about different generations here. You've got, you know, millennials drifting off very different politically to kind of like, if you got here Gen X, you got a big curve in Gen X, silent generation, the boomer generation, and that's why millennials...
That's what I'm talking about! That's why he's the MVP! That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
Best generation, hands down. Got everyone cooked. And also kind of, I watched this video from Jimmy the Giant, Big Up My G. He was talking about how the left does have an image problem, especially amongst young men. And I think that's true. And I think that means I have to actually physically look after myself more. It's another reason for me to do it and actually start hitting the bicep curls a lot better. Because I think that is true. You know, when you look at some of the people, you know, younger kids look up to, it's people like Tate and Rogan, and, you know, guys that are like in good shape, you know, and always flex their wealth and whatever. I think the left does have an image problem. I'm not saying like, you know, everyone needs like 50 Lamborghinis or whatever that they don't even own for a start. But what I'm saying is that I think you've got to be presented a lot better. You know, the stereotype of kind of left-leaning people is that, you know, they have blue hair and, you know, they're a bit crazy and whatever. And I think, you know, he talks about in this video like how, you know, some of the language people use to kind of emasculate, especially dudes on the left. There's a lot in here I agree with. And, you know, Jimmy is a real giant of the space. Is pretty good. And, you know, we're talking about one of the other issues that they have, the DNC have, is they abandoned FDR's kind of plans of universality in terms of, you know, a job, an adequate wage, a decent home, medical care, economic protection during sickness, a good education. You know, these are things that should be basically the foundations of any country. And, you know, talking about Joe Biden's legacy,
will be remembered as the president whose disastrous mishandling of the withdrawal from Afghanistan resulted in the tragic deaths of 13 American soldiers. I think he'll be remembered as the president whose gross mishandling of the U.S. economy resulted in inflation ravaging the pocketbooks of ordinary Americans. And I think he'll be remembered as the U.S. president whose disastrous foreign policy resulted in tragic war in the Middle East, war in Russia and Ukraine, and
that last bit I disagree with a little bit.
China threatening Taiwan.
That bit I also disagree with as well, because I think China would have done that under a Trump presidency as well. But we're going to discuss, you know, one of the main areas where the DNC failed. It was amongst Latino voters.
That was a bit of a surprise for basically every observer who had seen Democrats make gains among this demographic following the reversal of Roe v. Wade and following the heavy messaging that they put in on abortion and on women's rights in general. So it was a little bit of a surprise. And what's even more notable is that the gap was bigger among women of color and men of color than it was among white men and white women. And that was quite surprising too.
What do you mean? Sorry, just explain that.
Well, the gender gap between white men and white women was considerably narrower than the gender gap between women of color and men of color.
Right.
And that was notable into how stark the divergence was.
I wonder if that's down to women being obviously caring more about women's rights, like abortion rights and things like that, versus due to some of these dudes who probably didn't care about that, were more concerned about inflation. I wonder if it's down to that. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments on that one.
And talking of that, 45% of Hispanic Latino voters went for Trump. I mean, he's pushing those numbers up. How come?
I think this comes down to a couple of things. A lot of the times in the last few years, really in the last decade, Democrats misdiagnosed what the Latino community and what the Hispanic community actually wanted. They said that they wanted progressivism and immigration liberalism. And in truth, it seems that pocketbook issues and checkbook issues just motivate them a little bit more during times of high inflation. And
it's the economy, stupid.
There's nothing to condemn the community on for that. And I think Democrats really focused on the wrong things with that group and have been focusing on the wrong things with them since 2016 when Hillary Clinton hit her high watermarks.
Yeah, I think it's just a shame. Like, Bernie, I think, did appeal to Latino voters a lot more than a lot of the other Democratic voters. And that's because I think he pushed a lot of good things on the economy. And, you know, we've got specific voters here who do discuss this.
Mario and Mireya Alvarez found the American dream in Las Vegas.
Would you like some coffee?
They came to the U.S. from Mexico and Guatemala in the 80s. With his job in a supermarket. Is it still possible to do that for the younger generation?
That's my main concern right now. What's going to happen to our new generation? Nowadays, they're not even able to move out of their houses anymore because everything is so expensive.
Life wasn't. Do you really think Donald Trump's going to fix that? Did he do a lot to address that during his presidency, guys?
Expensive as it is right now.
We first met Mario back in February, when he was seriously considering a vote for Donald Trump. He was undecided, with previous votes for George W. Bush, Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Biden. At the last minute, he broke for Kamala Harris. But today, he's not upset about the results.
I'm kind of like more happy than upset. Why? Because Donald Trump is going to help the country with the economy.
The whole household is happy. Mireya and their 29-year-old son, Mario Jr., did vote for Trump.
Initially, I will say I did not agree with him. And then I started seeing that he was not afraid to speak his mind. And I noticed that he was not scared to say what he felt, regardless.
I mean, we know what he felt about certain ethnic minority groups.
Of what people would say, and I think I respect that about him.
So you liked his kind of brashness, his personality?
Yeah, I would say yes.
They're not alone.
I would have asked him about his comments around Mexicans, to be honest with you. I know this man, he's Guatemalan, but I'd ask him, you know, do you think that was what kind of statement was that? You know, you got this lady here talking about how her family member, one of her, I think it was her niece and nephew, saw their dad be deported for being an undocumented migrant. And then these same two kids, when they grew up, voted for Trump, despite the fact that Trump said he would push ICE to deport even more people. So I don't know what's going on with certain people and how stupid they are, right? And she was talking about how traumatized they were to see their dad be deported, you know, to be essentially grabbed in front of them and face, you know, deportation, and the fact that they haven't seen the guy for years, and yet they still vote for the guy who pushes that kind of policy, and will put that trauma onto more people. It's wild behavior, honestly. And, you know, you got this geezer here. This one, I think he deserves food poisoning, to be honest. So he's asked about, you know, who do you vote for, Trump or Biden? He goes, Trump, because there's too many immigrants. He goes, I'm an immigrant, but there's too many.
Migrantes, pero no mucho.
No más.
No más.
Llegaste, pero no más.
Exactamente.
You came in, but no more. This is the kind of scumbag who pulled the drawbridge behind him. Scumbag, complete scumbag. Hope you get food poisoning, pal. And you know, there's so many stories of this, saying this geezer here saying, I have a friend, his mother is an undocumented immigrant. He admitted that he voted for Trump due to concern about inflation. I just don't know what to say anymore. He's college educated. He still thinks Trump wasn't talking about his mum, and this is the big problem. You know, you got here, undocumented husband of Indiana Trump supporter deported to Mexico. Indiana family member and business owner Roberto is deported despite having no criminal record. His wife, a Donald Trump voter, thought her wife would be safe. And this is what I mean, like they always think it's always going to be there, always going to be someone else. And this is Axios reporting it. Trump will begin operations to deport millions of undocumented immigrants when he starts his term. Campaign press secretary Caroline Leavitt said on Wednesday morning he will launch the largest mass deportation operation, especially in a country which had a massive labour crisis as well. Do you think this is even smart? This is going to push inflation even higher. And discussing inflation, is Ash Sarkar saying, in the last 4 years, American food prices have gone up by 22%. Like, I'm sorry, but running a campaign on the threat to democracy when people are unable to afford staple groceries was completely bonkers. And yeah, I agree with that. Rory Stewart kind of discussing why, how he was wrong on this one.
I was completely wrong, but I...
Shock and disgust this morning, almost. People saying, how could Americans do this to the world? Do you have a bit of that in you?
Well, obviously, I'm guilty of massive wishful thinking, and I suppose wishful thinking is about my believing that America wouldn't do this. I became very invested in a story that maybe populism was not in an inexorable rise, and that maybe what had happened in Poland this year and what happened in India and to a lesser extent Turkey, maybe even Marine Le Pen's not doing as well as she might have done in the French election, maybe suggested a tide was turning. And
the thing is, right, like, you can have a situation, like I mentioned on my stream, you can have FDR in America and you could have Adolf Hitler in Germany, like at near enough the same time. Post Great Depression, right? So this idea that, just because other countries are turning a corner doesn't really mean much. Countries face populist waves in different times. We had, the UK had our one in 2016 to about 2020, you would argue, from kind of Brexit to Boris Johnson. That was our real populist wave. And what the return of Donald Trump shows you is it can come back if governments are complacent and they don't deal with the issues that people are facing. Populism, right, especially right-wing populism is always just around the corner from you. And so you can see kind of how kind of distraught Rory Stewart is by this. But if you don't deal with people's basic needs, this is what's going to happen. Jon Stewart, I think this is one of the important things. Like, I can't play the clip because I'll get copyright, but Jon Stewart saying we're all going to have to wake up tomorrow morning and work like hell. You've got Jon Stewart saying we all need to wake up tomorrow morning and work like hell to move the world to the place we prefer it to be. And normally I'm quite pessimistic on a lot of things, but there have been a few people in my life that have really changed my view on that. And as much as it feels like we're walking into hell always, in order to kind of just get basic things in society, it feels like a complete nightmare at times. But we have to try at least. As difficult as it's easier to say, like, it's too far gone. It's easy to give up. It really is. But we have to at least try. And I think the best thing you can do is get involved in the primaries and things like that in order to get things done. Because that's like my boy Russell Adler said.
We don't just sit back and hope for the best. We'll make the best happen.
And that's what it's about. It's, you can't hope and pray. You have to get things done. I did find this clip really funny. So it's that Joe Biden smile, and it's like, oh yeah, one more thing, Kamala, make America great again, because he didn't attend the Harris watch party. I wonder if he knew. And going back to kind of Europe, we're kind of going around everywhere, the houses today, which is basically like Macron talking about there are carnivores and herbivores in this world, and Europe needs to figure out what it is. I think it's a bit of a dumb analogy, considering you got a hippo, which is absolutely cracked. You've got rhinos who are cracked, and you have a Stegosaurus, also cracked. I find it a bit of a weird analogy. I get his point though. Like, I think he should have said there are predators and there are prey, and Europe needs to decide, does it want to be prey at this point? It doesn't have to be a monster. But can Europe protect itself? Maybe my analogy is pretty bad as well, because no one really wants to be called a predator. But the point being is he's talking about what does Europe want now? And this is something he pushed during Trump's last presidency of, does Europe want to keep being reliant on America, or do we want to stand on our own 2 feet here? And I think Europe will have to stand on its own against kind of aggression from other countries. I think he's 100% correct. He talks about, Trump being elected, and he's been elected by the American people to defend the interests of America, and he's saying that's not a problem. But he's saying, Europe needs to really think about it, where it wants to be, in terms of historic enemies and stuff like that. So I think he's correct. I think, Donald Trump exists on a transactional relationship. That's something Japan figured out, and something Japan have actually discussed openly, that they know what he's like. And I think Europe has, the EU wants to accelerate talks with the UK on a new security pact after the election of Donald Trump. It's now a top priority for the EU in relation with the UK and gain momentum in talks with Starmer in Budapest this week. So I wonder, because Labour wanted to kind of pair security talks with trade talks, I wonder how far they're actually going to get with that. And kind of the final bit on this, which is Labour advisors want lessons learnt from Harris's defeat. Voters set the agenda. So, this is what I'm saying, like, the main takeaway from this is the fact that the voters decided what the key issues were and went on that. Like when you hit, like, as far as kind of right-wing populism goes, it normally works better in peace times, I think, or better times where, people can, instead of focusing on the economy, they focus on, being racist and whatever. But I think when you've got a guy who's talking about inflation and the Democratic Party just doing very little on it, like I said, with the greedflation and stuff like that, they did very little to kind of curb that. Voters are going to get annoyed. Voters voted for Biden, not just because they hated Trump, I think, but it was partly because of his left-wing populism. And so when you don't deliver that in office, so, when you say you're going to cancel student loan debt and then you don't cancel student loan debt, stuff like that, voters remember that kind of stuff. And so I think the one thing the Labour Party can learn from this is that you ran on a ticket of fixing issues. You ran on a ticket on stabilising the economy and getting growth and, fixing living standards. You have to deliver that. People have to feel the difference after a few years. You can blame inflation or whatever, just like the Tories did, just like Biden Harris will. They're going to blame the post-COVID, inflation spike, because it wasn't just the Americans who suffered through it. It was a lot of, most of the developed world, most of the world actually dealt with it. And a lot of governments lost, those elections afterwards. And so it's not a full failure of Biden and Harris to not deal with inflation, but I don't think they did anywhere near enough, especially deal with greedflation, because Biden even talked about it, but he did very little to actually deal with it. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Kind of like a little US special, I guess. Because it's worth discussing these things, especially in the context of the UK, because we're not too far away from right-wing populists. That's the problem. That's the thing I fear most. The right-wing populist, in my opinion, is one of the most dangerous politicians, because they will agree with you on certain issues, but they will offer you the wrong solutions. They'll blame minorities. They'll blame foreigners. They'll blame everyone else apart from the main culprits, big business. They will never deal with it. Never. If you give them the reins of power, they won't deal with big business. Guarantee Donald Trump will be in the pocket of big business. That's why he's got Elon in his ear. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Hopefully I haven't overstepped the mark in my analysis in certain areas. And hopefully if there are any Americans who are watching this, feel free to let me know what a British guy thinks. And I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.